My name is Jacob Reynolds, and for the past 6 years, I've served in the U.S. Army. I enlisted shortly after high school, not fully understanding the path I was choosing, but determined to make something of myself. I grew up in a small town in Ohio, where opportunities were limited, and life seemed to have a rigid plan already drawn out for everyone. From a young age, I had this restless energy, a desire to prove myself, to escape the ordinary, and to carve my own identity. Joining the military seemed like the natural way to achieve that, though I had no idea it would eventually shape every part of my life, including my personal relationships, in ways I could never have imagined. I met my wife, Sophia Clark, at a local cafe in Columbus when I was 22 and she was 20. She was working part-time while finishing college, and I was home on leave after a training exercise. I remember the first time I saw her. She had this warmth in her eyes, a kind of quiet strength that drew people in. Our conversation started with the most trivial topics, books, music, and favorite movies, but quickly spiraled into deeper confessions, the kind of raw, honest sharing that makes you feel as if you've known someone your entire life. Within a few months, it became clear that Sophia wasn't just a fleeting connection. She was someone I wanted to build a life with. If you love ruthless revenge stories packed with shocking twists, like this video and subscribe now new. Never-before-seen stories are released here every day, each more intense than the last. We married when I was 24 and she was 22. Our wedding was modest, held at a small chapel with only our closest friends and family. I still remember the feeling of holding her hand at the altar, promising to stand by each other through everything life would throw at us. Back then, I genuinely believed that love could withstand any distance or hardship. I left for my first overseas deployment shortly after the wedding, and Sophia stayed behind to complete her studies and start her career in graphic design. We exchanged letters and video calls when possible, and for the first year, I thought everything was going perfectly. The problem began subtly, almost imperceptibly, during my second deployment. I started noticing little changes in her tone over video calls, small pauses, and a growing defensiveness whenever I asked simple questions about her day. At first, I dismissed it as a natural strain of a long-distance marriage, the kind any military couple would inevitably face. But over time, those little cracks widened, and the reality I refused to see slowly became impossible to ignore. While I was risking my life thousands of miles away, my wife was building a different life behind my back, a life I would only discover after returning home. I don't think anyone can truly prepare for the moment they discover their partner has betrayed them. For me, the first hints were subtle comments from neighbors and old friends, passing remarks that sounded harmless at first, until a pattern emerged. Sophia had started telling everyone I had left the family, that I had abandoned her and our home voluntarily. At first, I couldn't comprehend it. How could a woman I had vowed to spend my life with so casually rewrite our story? But the more I listened, the more I realized the magnitude of what had happened. My world, the one I had fought to protect and the one I had built in my mind while serving, was crumbling even as I tried to convince myself it was just rumor. Every day in the Army, we're taught discipline, patience, and resilience, but nothing prepares you for the emotional warfare that comes when the person you trusted most chooses deception over loyalty. I spent countless nights lying awake in my bunk, imagining confrontations, plotting possible ways to confront her without completely losing control. And then one day, I made a decision that would change everything. I would return home unannounced. I wouldn't let her prepare any stories or excuses. I would see the truth with my own eyes, and I would make sure I had proof. That proof would be my weapon, the only way to make her finally understand that I had never left, that I had never given up, and that her lies were about to come crashing down. The moment I stepped off the plane, I felt a mix of anticipation, an unease twisting inside me. Every deployment had taught me to assess situations carefully, to notice details others might overlook, and now those instincts were sharper than ever. I didn't want to rush in blindly, but I needed to see for myself the reality Sophia had been hiding. My mind replayed every conversation, every subtle lie, and every pause that had once seemed innocent. I rented a small car and drove straight to the neighborhood I had known since marrying her, The streets now familiar yet tinged with the unfamiliar sense that my life had been quietly rewritten in my absence. Pulling up to our home, my heart pounded, not just from the adrenaline of the drive, but from the fear of what I might find. The house looked the same, freshly painted, well kept, almost like a picture-perfect scene designed to hide chaos beneath the surface. I parked a block away and watched from the sidewalk, taking in details I had never noticed before. There was a new car in the driveway, one I had never seen her drive, and the mailbox had a few letters that seemed oddly addressed. I lingered, pretending to be a passerby, observing patterns of movement that might reveal what had been going on behind my back for months. I had anticipated confrontation, but nothing could have prepared me for the surge of anger that hit when I finally saw him. There he was, a man I didn't recognize at first, someone Sophia had clearly invited into our lives while I risked mine overseas. My stomach churned with disbelief, but beneath it all, a methodical part of me took over. I couldn't allow blind rage to control my actions. I needed clarity, details, and proof. Slowly, I began taking notes, photographs from a distance, and piecing together the reality of what she had done. Every image, every snippet of conversation I overheard was another piece of evidence that would later speak louder than any argument or accusation. That night, I returned to a cheap motel, my mind racing with strategies. Sleep was impossible, not because of the adrenaline or anger, but because I kept replaying every memory of our marriage, the night spent planning our future, the promises we whispered at the altar, and the countless small moments that built the illusion of trust. It was devastating to realize that all of it had been twisted into a lie in my absence. I couldn't confront her impulsively. I had to wait, observe, and plan. If there was one thing my army training had taught me, it was patience in the face of chaos. And this situation, more personal than any mission I had ever undertaken, demanded nothing less than precision. Over the next week, I observed her routine carefully. I noted the time she left the house, the men who visited, and even the small gestures she made when she believed she was unobserved. Every detail was crucial. I even followed her to a cafe one morning, witnessing her laugh in a way that had once been reserved for me, her head tilting slightly as if the world belonged only to her and the new companion she had brought into my life. With each passing day, the puzzle became clearer, and with clarity came a calm but burning determination. I wasn't just angry. I was calculating the steps that would ensure she couldn't deny the truth once I decided to strike. The hardest part, ironically, was holding back my presence. The temptation to storm into the house and confront her directly was overwhelming. I imagined the look on her face, the shock, and the fear, but I knew that reacting emotionally would only undermine the control I needed. She had thrived in my absence, weaving lies so convincingly that neighbors and friends had believed her story. I needed to create a scenario where her lies would unravel naturally, exposing her to everyone who had been fooled. And so I waited, collecting proof like a soldier gathering intelligence before an assault. Every message, every photograph, every witness I could secretly document would be ammunition for the reckoning to come. By the end of the week, I had everything I needed. The evidence was undeniable. Messages from him, receipts for gifts, even video clips of her admitting lies to friends when she thought no one else was listening. Each piece made my pulse quicken, not with fear, but with anticipation. I could finally plan my return to her life, not as the man who had been absent, but as the one armed with truth. I would not just confront her. I would dismantle the false reality she had built, and she would understand, with every fiber of her being, that I had never left and that betrayal carries consequences. The next morning, I woke up before dawn, the motel room quiet except for the faint hum of the air conditioner. I had been planning this moment for days, calculating every move, and now it was time to put my plan into motion. My goal wasn't just to confront Sophia. It was to expose the truth in a way that left no room for lies. I dressed carefully, opting for clothes that made me look unassuming, blending into the neighborhood like a man who belonged there rather than the soldier who had been gone for months. Every detail mattered. I couldn't allow her to anticipate my return. I parked a few blocks away from our home and approached on foot, my senses heightened with every step. Memories of the life we had built together surged through me. Our first apartment, our tiny kitchen where she cooked my favorite meals, the late-night conversations we had about dreams and fears. Those memories clashed violently with the image of her laughing with another man, her smile no longer reserved for me. It was a painful realization that the woman I had loved with my entire heart had begun rewriting our shared history, as if I had never been part of it. Reaching the front yard, I paused behind a tree, surveying the house. Sophia was in the kitchen, her back to the window, speaking to someone whose presence made my blood boil. I recognized him instantly, the man I had seen earlier, the intruder in my life. They were laughing at something trivial, completely oblivious to the storm that had silently arrived outside their door. In that moment, a strange mixture of rage and calm swept over me. I had trained for years to control situations under pressure, and I reminded myself that this confrontation had to be precise. Acting impulsively would ruin everything I had meticulously prepared. I decided to enter the house quietly, slipping into the back door, which thankfully had been left unlocked. The interior smelled familiar. Sophia's favorite candles, the faint scent of coffee lingering from the morning, but every comforting detail was now tainted by betrayal. I crept down the hallway toward the living room, keeping low, making mental notes of the environment. Every piece of evidence I had gathered over the past week suddenly became more valuable. I had photographed, screenshots, and video clips, all ready to dismantle the web of lies she had spun. My presence would be a shock, and the evidence would ensure she couldn't deny anything. Finally, I stepped into the living room, and that's when Sophia saw me. Her eyes widened in disbelief, the color draining from her face as the realization hit. She opened her mouth as if to speak, but no words came out. The man beside her froze, a look of panic and confusion overtaking his previously confident demeanor. I let the moment linger, allowing the shock to sink in. This was my first victory. The fear in their eyes was a confirmation that my return had disrupted the false reality they had so carefully constructed. My silence spoke louder than any accusation I could make at that instant. Then I revealed the proof. I placed my phone on the coffee table, showing the messages, the photos, and the videos, each one a clear testament to her betrayal. Sophia's hands trembled, and she tried to explain, but the evidence was indisputable. I didn't raise my voice. I let the truth do the talking. The man beside her tried to intervene, but I stopped him with a firm glare, signaling that this confrontation wasn't for him. It was between me and the woman who had promised to stand by my side. The gravity of the situation was finally clear to her, and her composure began to crack under the weight of exposure. As the minutes passed, Sophia's panic grew. She stumbled over words, attempting excuses that sounded hollow even to herself. Her lies, which had seemed believable when spoken to friends and neighbors, couldn't withstand the tangible evidence in front of her. I could see the realization hitting her in stages, the disbelief, the fear, and finally the acknowledgement that I had never abandoned our family. It was in that moment I felt a mixture of satisfaction and sorrow. I hadn't just uncovered betrayal. I had also reclaimed control over my life, asserting that my absence did not equate to weakness. By the time the confrontation ended, Sophia was silent, her face pale and eyes wide with regret. I left the house shortly after, knowing I had planted the seeds for the next steps of my plan. I would make sure that her betrayal didn't go unpunished, but for now, the initial shock had to settle. I had returned unannounced, faced the truth head-on, and ensured that she knew I had never left. That night, as I drove back to the motel, I reflected on the journey that had brought me here, from enlistment to marriage, from love to betrayal, and finally, to the moment when I reclaimed my power. After the confrontation, I knew that immediate action was enough. Sophia had felt the shock, but real consequences would come only if the world saw the truth I had uncovered. I began meticulously planning the next stage of my revenge. My military training had instilled in me a methodical approach to every challenge, and now I applied the same precision to my personal life. Each interaction, every public appearance, and every piece of evidence I revealed had to be strategically timed for maximum impact. I wasn't going to act impulsively. Patience was my ally, and the careful orchestration of events would ensure her downfall. The first step was reclaiming the narrative among friends and family who had believed her lies. I started contacting people quietly, using screenshots, photos, and messages as proof. Each conversation was deliberate. I didn't want anger or emotion to cloud the facts. Instead, I let the evidence speak, allowing others to form their conclusions. It was satisfying to witness the gradual shift in perception as people who had once pitted Sophia for being abandoned began to question her credibility. I could see the panic in her eyes when she realized that the web of deception she had spun was beginning to unravel outside our home. Next, I turned my attention to her professional life. Sophia had built a reputation at her company as someone responsible and trustworthy. I knew that if I could quietly plant evidence of her dishonesty, the repercussions would be severe. I reached out to colleagues, sharing concrete examples of her behavior. Messages she had sent admitting lies, receipts of gifts purchased for the other man, and video evidence showing indiscretions. The reactions were immediate. Her once respected image began to crumble. I didn't need to make threats or raise my voice. The truth carried weight on its own. The sense of control I felt during this stage was almost intoxicating. While managing the fallout externally, I also had to prepare for internal confrontation. I spent long nights reflecting on the bond we once had, considering how to deliver consequences that were both fair and impactful. Revenge was not just about humiliation. It was about restoring balance and ensuring that betrayal carried weight. Each step I planned was deliberate. Public exposure, professional consequences, and personal confrontation, all timed to leave no room for denial. Sophia had underestimated me, believing that absence meant weakness, but I had returned stronger, armed with facts and determination. Every calculated move was a lesson she would never forget. One evening, I decided it was time to confront her social circle directly. I arranged casual meetups under the guise of reconciliation, but each interaction was carefully structured. I shared stories of my time in the Army, emphasizing my sacrifices, the risks I had taken, and my unwavering commitment to our family, all while subtly dropping facts that contradicted Sophia's narrative. Watching friends' expressions shift from confusion to understanding was deeply satisfying. The fear and panic in Sophia's eyes, whenever she realized her lies were being dismantled in front of people she valued, was proof that my plan was working exactly as intended. The psychological aspect of revenge was just as powerful as the tangible consequences. I had learned in the Army that control over perception was critical in any operation. I applied the same principle here, controlling how others viewed the situation, guiding their understanding, and letting the weight of truth crush the falsehoods she had built around herself. I was no longer just a man wronged. I had become the orchestrator of a reckoning that was inevitable. Each carefully executed step reinforced my power and her helplessness, and I savored the growing tension that foreshadowed the final stages of my plan. By the end of the month, the changes were undeniable. Friends and family who had once sided with Sophia now approached me with cautious respect, and whispers of doubt began circulating in professional circles. The man she had involved in her betrayal became increasingly distant, unsure how to navigate the fallout. Sophia's panic grew daily, and she began making mistakes, small, desperate errors that revealed the depth of her fear. I knew the climax of this revenge was approaching, and I felt a grim satisfaction knowing that when the final confrontation came, it would be decisive, leaving no room for lies or excuses. The following weeks became a delicate balance of observation, strategy, and execution. Sophia's panic was now an ever-present companion, evident in the way she moved through her day, constantly checking her phone, whispering hurriedly to friends, and avoiding eye contact with anyone who might question her. I watched from a distance, content in the knowledge that my subtle actions were dismantling her carefully constructed world. Each misstep she made was a confirmation of her fear, and I had learned to use it as a tool. Like a tactician in the field, I was orchestrating every moment, knowing that the smallest error could tip the balance entirely in my favor. One evening, I attended a local gathering she had arranged, under the pretense of reconnecting with old friends. I remained quiet at first, letting her bask in the false sense of normalcy she had desperately tried to maintain. Then, methodically, I began revealing truths in a manner that made it impossible for her to defend herself. Subtle comments, questions, and reminders of events she had tried to erase from everyone's memory slowly eroded her credibility. Each revelation was like a calculated strike, precise and deliberate, designed to maximize the psychological impact while maintaining control. Her expression shifted from confusion to panic as the reality of exposure sank in. I also ensured that professional consequences intensified alongside personal humiliation. Sophia's colleagues had begun noticing inconsistencies in her stories, and I continued supplying them with undeniable proof of her deceit. Emails, photographs, and even small recorded confessions were shared anonymously, creating a ripple effect that was impossible to contain. The woman who had once commanded respect was now facing doubt and suspicion in her workplace. I watched quietly as whispers spread, as co-workers exchanged glances, and as her once solid reputation began to crumble. Every action reinforced my control and her fear, proving that meticulous planning and patience yielded far more than impulsive confrontation ever could. The psychological tension escalated when the man involved in her betrayal began to distance himself. His confidence wavered as rumors and facts collided, leaving him uncertain of his position in the social circle. He attempted to contact Sophia in private, trying to salvage whatever stability remained, but even he could see the inevitability of the consequences she had invited upon herself. I observed silently, knowing that every reaction I provoked further strengthened my position. Each ripple of fear, each misstep, and each confrontation added momentum to the inevitable unraveling of the life she had thought she could control without me. I decided it was time to reclaim our home, not through violence, but through symbolic authority. I returned to the house quietly, letting the empty rooms speak for themselves, imagining the panic that would strike Sophia when she realized how thoroughly I had reclaimed what was mine. The furniture, the layout, the very air she once believed she controlled now felt like an extension of my presence. She had thought she could erase me, but my careful strategy had ensured that I was not only back, but omnipresent in her mind. The control I exerted wasn't about domination. It was about revealing that betrayal carries consequences, and that absence does not equate to weakness. By this point, Sophia's desperation became almost tangible. Friends approached me for clarification, co-workers began avoiding her, and even casual acquaintances whispered about inconsistencies she could no longer explain. Her frantic attempts to regain control only exposed further errors, and the panic that had been simmering beneath her composed exterior began boiling over. I allowed it to happen slowly, savoring every moment, knowing that the final act of exposure would carry far greater weight when the tension reached its peak. The anticipation of the inevitable confrontation filled me with a grim satisfaction that only someone who had been wrong could understand. As the chapter of preparation drew to a close, I reflected on the transformation within myself. I had moved from shock and betrayal to methodical planning, exercising patience and control in ways that mirrored my military training. Every detail, every observation, and every strategic revelation had brought me closer to ultimate justice. I was no longer the man who had returned unannounced. I had become the architect of a reckoning that Sophia could not escape. The final confrontation loomed, promising both closure and a clear demonstration that betrayal, no matter how carefully hidden, always comes with consequences. The day I had been planning for months finally arrived. I woke early, the air heavy with anticipation, knowing that the events of this day would forever alter the course of both my life and Sophia's. Every detail had been meticulously prepared, the evidence, the witnesses, and the psychological timing. I dressed carefully, choosing clothing that made me appear calm, confident, and in control, because this confrontation would be as much about perception as it would be about facts. The military had taught me discipline, patience, and strategy, and now I was applying those lessons to a battle of deception and betrayal that had invaded my personal life. I arrived at the house just before noon, parking a few blocks away to avoid drawing attention. Sophia, unaware of precision timing, was likely assuming I would not act so decisively. I walked up to the front door, key in hand, and paused for a moment to breathe, centering myself. The past month had been a whirlwind of emotions, betrayal, anger, sorrow, but now they were tempered by focus. This was not a moment for blind rage. It was a culmination of calculated steps, the final stage where the truth would be revealed and justice, in its most personal form, would be served. As I entered, the house felt both familiar and alien. The spaces we had shared, the kitchen where she had once prepared meals for me, the living room where we had laughed at movies and talked late into the night, were now stages for exposure and reckoning. I moved deliberately, ensuring that every step reinforced my control over the situation. Then I heard her voice, frantic and unsteady, and the sound of someone else trying to offer comfort. That was my cue. I allowed the door to click closed behind me and took my first deliberate step into the room, letting the tension settle like a storm cloud over them both. Sophia froze immediately when she saw me, her face registering the shock that I had anticipated. The man at her side stiffened, the confusion and fear clear in his eyes. I remained calm, my gaze unwavering, letting the silence speak volumes. Then, methodically, I began presenting the evidence I had gathered over weeks of careful observation. Photographs, messages, and videos were laid out systematically, each piece of proof undeniable and inescapable. Sophia's frantic attempts to explain herself were weak and unconvincing. The truth was overwhelming and there was no escape. Her panic was immediate, a raw, visible reaction that underscored the effectiveness of my strategy. I didn't shout. I didn't raise my voice. I let the facts dominate the room. The man she had believed was her secret ally grew increasingly uncomfortable as he realized the magnitude of betrayal he had unknowingly participated in. I addressed him calmly, explaining the circumstances and highlighting the truth behind every action, every lie, and every hidden conversation. Sophia attempted to interject, her voice shaking, but the weight of the evidence silenced her. It was a turning point. The carefully crafted illusion of her control was shattered, and the consequences of her actions could no longer be denied or avoided. Once the immediate confrontation concluded, I ensured that witnesses were aware of the truth. Friends, neighbors, and family members were discreetly informed, each one presented with undeniable proof. The whispers that had begun months earlier now turned into full acknowledgement of her deception. I observed the psychological toll it took on Sophia, the way she flinched at every glance, the way her confident posture collapsed into defeat. Revenge, I realized, was not only about exposing lies, but also about ensuring that the truth penetrated every sphere she had manipulated, leaving no room for denial or reinterpretation. Finally, I addressed the man directly. His presence had amplified her sense of impunity, but now, with the exposure complete, his role became secondary. I made it clear that his involvement would have consequences in his personal and professional life, not through threats, but through the undeniable truth of the evidence I presented. Sophia's attempts to intervene were futile. Her panic was total, her voice barely audible, as I calmly explained the logical outcome of their choices. Watching the ripple effect of their fear and regret crystallize the final victory I had been orchestrating for months, a satisfaction rooted not in cruelty, but in the restoration of justice and personal dignity. By the evening, the situation had fully resolved itself. Sophia's lies had been dismantled publicly and privately, her reputation tarnished, and the illusion she had built in my absence fully exposed. I sat quietly in the house that had once symbolized shared dreams and now represented truth reclaimed. For the first time in months, a sense of calm settled over me. The anger remained, yes, but it was now tempered by accomplishment. I had returned, confronted betrayal, gathered evidence, and executed a plan that restored balance and revealed the consequences of deceit. The lessons of patience, strategy, and control had proven invaluable, and while the scars remained, I had reclaimed my life. As I left the house that night, walking through the quiet streets with the satisfaction of a mission completed. I reflected on everything that had transpired. Betrayal had tested me in ways that no military exercise could, but through careful observation, patience, and meticulous planning, I had ensured that justice was served. Sophia's panic, fear, and exposure were the culmination of months of preparation, a reminder that no betrayal, no matter how carefully concealed, can withstand the determined pursuit of truth. I had returned unannounced, armed with proof, and finally, the reckoning was complete. If you enjoyed this story, hit the like button and leave a comment letting me know what you thought. And if you're not already subscribed, please subscribe and turn on notifications so you don't miss new stories like this one. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.